Season 3 Episode 5 honestly feels like the beginning of the collapse for almost every major character. Rue is running out of time and getting trapped deeper inside a violent criminal world. Cassie is losing herself to fame and online validation. Jules feels emotionally empty despite living comfortably. Nate is psychologically collapsing after losing control over his life, and Alamo's paranoia is slowly turning him into a ticking time bomb. The biggest theme throughout the episode is control. Every character is either trying to control somebody else or becoming controlled themselves by fame, money, fear, addiction, love, or power. And honestly, the scary part is that most of them still don't realize how trapped they've become. This episode really feels like the moment where the foundations are being laid for everything to completely fall apart later in the season. So, there you have it. That was the full breakdown and explanation for Euphoria Season 3 Episode 5. What do you think is going to happen next? And honestly, which storyline do you think is heading toward the darkest ending this season? Euphoria Season 3 Episode 5 continues pushing every single character deeper into chaos, and honestly, this episode felt like the moment where all of the lies, manipulation, and bad decisions finally started catching up to everybody. The episode mainly focuses on Rue getting trapped further inside Alamo's dangerous operation, Cassie becoming consumed by fame and attention, Nate completely spiraling after losing control of his life, and Jules slowly realizing that the comfortable lifestyle she chose may actually be destroying her emotionally. What made this episode so interesting was the contrast between the different worlds these characters are living in. Rue's storyline feels dark, violent, and constantly dangerous, while Cassie's storyline looks glamorous on the surface with money, followers, and success. But underneath both stories is the exact same theme. Control. Every character in this episode is either trying to control somebody else or becoming controlled themselves. And by the end of the episode, it becomes very clear that things are only going to get worse from here. So today, we're going to fully break down Euphoria Season 3 Episode 5, explain all of the major storylines, and talk about the hidden meanings behind some of the biggest moments in the episode. And just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Rue's situation gets worse. The episode opens with Rue inside Alamo's operation, and honestly, the tension throughout these scenes feels suffocating. Ever since the attack on their business, everybody inside the organization has become paranoid, and Rue can clearly feel that she's slowly running out of time. One of the most uncomfortable moments early in the episode is when Bishop speaks to Rue about how there's been a cascade of problems ever since she arrived. Now honestly, the strange thing here is that Rue is obviously the common factor connecting all the chaos happening around them, but Bishop and Alamo still haven't directly accused her yet, which makes these scenes even scarier because it feels like they either already suspect her or they're intentionally pretending not to. And honestly, Bishop continues being one of the most terrifying characters this season because of how emotionless he is. He never raises his voice, he barely reacts emotionally, but the way he casually participates in violence makes him genuinely unsettling. The episode even shows a man tied up and tortured simply because security failed during the attack. And the scary part is that the man wasn't even directly responsible. That moment is extremely important because Rue realizes something terrifying. If they're willing to do this to one of their own workers, then they'll do far worse to her once they discover the truth. You can literally see the fear building in Rue throughout the episode. At this point, she's trapped between two impossible outcomes: cooperate with the D and risk getting exposed, or stop helping them and face decades in prison. And honestly, Rue looks emotionally exhausted by the pressure. Cassie's fame begins corrupting her, while Cassie's storyline continues moving into much darker territory. After appearing in Brandon's content, her online popularity explodes almost overnight. The episode shows Maddie helping run her account by packaging clothing orders, organizing fan interactions, and basically handling all the work behind the scenes. But while Maddie is doing all the labor, Cassie is completely absorbed in the attention she's receiving. There's even a moment where Cassie happily celebrates hitting 50,000 subscribers while messages and orders flood onto her laptop. And honestly, this entire storyline feels like a commentary on internet fame and validation. Cassie is becoming emotionally addicted to attention from strangers online. There's a scene where she records a video saying, "For my fans, I'll do anything," and that line perfectly explains where her character is mentally right now. Cassie values validation more than genuine emotional connection. The dangerous thing is that she doesn't realize how vulnerable that mindset makes her. As the episode continues, Brandon asks Cassie what's stopping her from moving in with him, and honestly, that moment feels like the beginning of her losing complete control over her own life. Because throughout the episode, it becomes increasingly obvious that Brandon and the people around him don't truly value Cassie as a person. They value her image, her popularity, and the money she can generate. Maddie even starts realizing that Cassie is emotionally abandoning her now that success and fame are entering her life. There's a moment where Cassie tells Maddie, "It's not personal, it's just business," and honestly, that line says everything about how much Cassie is changing. The same person who once desperately wanted love and emotional connection is now treating relationships like transactions, and that's exactly why her storyline feels so tragic this season. She thinks she's gaining power and independence, but in reality, she's becoming another product controlled by an industry that doesn't actually care about her. Jules feels emotionally empty. Jules continues having one of the most emotionally depressing storylines in the season. On the surface, her life looks comfortable. She's living in a beautiful apartment, making easy money, and no longer struggling financially, but emotionally, she feels completely empty. Ever since giving up on art school and abandoning her creative passion, Jules has looked increasingly lost. The episode even shows her sitting around during the middle of the day doing basically nothing meaningful with her life. And honestly, that boredom is becoming dangerous for her emotionally. Earlier in the season, painting gave her a sense of purpose again, but after receiving criticism for her artwork, Jules immediately spiraled emotionally. This episode really highlights how desperate she's become for emotional attention and validation. There's a scene where she tells Rue, "If you want me, make me yours," and honestly, that line feels less romantic and more emotionally desperate. Jules wants somebody to give her purpose because she no longer knows who she is outside comfort and temporary pleasure. But things become even worse when the man funding her apartment discovers clothing belonging to another person inside the apartment. Immediately, the power imbalance in their relationship becomes obvious again, because at the end of the day, Jules doesn't actually own this life. It's conditional, and the moment she stops being useful or desirable, she could lose everything. That realization feels like it's slowly starting to hit her emotionally. Nate completely falls apart. Nate's storyline this episode honestly feels pathetic in the saddest possible way. His house is filled with alcohol bottles, trash, and signs that he's completely lost control over his life. And emotionally, he looks destroyed without Cassie around. There's even a voicemail where he tells her, "I'm really counting on you, babe." Now what makes this interesting is how much the power dynamic between them has changed. Earlier in the season, Cassie depended on Nate emotionally and financially, but now Nate seems desperate for her support, while her life appears to be moving upward publicly. And honestly, this reversal completely destroys Nate's ego, because Nate has always needed control over people and situations, but this season keeps putting him in positions where he's powerless. At the same time, Naz's men continue hunting him over the massive amount of money he owes. The episode even shows Nate getting violently attacked again after trying to hide from them. And honestly, it feels like Nate's entire world is collapsing simultaneously, financially, emotionally, and psychologically. For once, Nate looks genuinely weak instead of intimidating, and that's a huge shift for his character. The deep pressure on Ruyon of the most important moments in the episode is Rue meeting with the D officers again. They tell her this may be her final opportunity to help them. Now honestly, it feels like the D is beginning to suspect that Rue is too emotionally compromised and too deep inside the organization to continue being reliable. But Rue desperately wants another chance because the alternative is terrifying. If she stops cooperating, she could face decades in prison, but if Alamo discovers the truth, she'll probably be killed. And honestly, this creates one of the darkest situations Rue has ever faced in the entire series, because unlike previous seasons where her problems mainly revolved around addiction and self-destructs, this season places her inside a genuinely life-threatening criminal world. And the pressure is clearly breaking her mentally. Alamo's paranoia begins growing as the episode moves toward its ending. Alamo becomes increasingly unstable and paranoid. After the attack on his organization and the constant problems happening around him, he's convinced that somebody inside the operation is betraying him. One particularly important moment involves Magic repeatedly warning Alamo not to trust Rue, but honestly, I think this could backfire horribly for Magic herself because paranoid leaders often become suspicious of anybody speaking too much, and it wouldn't be surprising if Alamo eventually starts thinking Magic is trying to redirect blame away from herself. The final scene of the episode is incredibly tense. Alamo confronts Kid while holding a knife and demands the truth, and honestly, the scariest part about this scene is that Alamo no longer seems emotionally stable enough to think rationally. His empire is damaged. His organization is paranoid, and he feels surrounded by betrayal, which makes him extremely dangerous. The episode ends before we see exactly what happens next, but it's obvious that violence is coming. Season 3, Episode 5 honestly feels like the beginning of the collapse for almost every major character. Rue is running out of time and getting trapped deeper inside a violent criminal world. Cassie is losing herself to fame and online validation. Jules feels emotionally empty despite living comfortably. Nate is psychologically collapsing after losing control over his life, and Alamo's paranoia is slowly turning him into a ticking time bomb. The biggest theme throughout the episode is control. Every character is either trying to control somebody else or becoming controlled themselves by fame, money, fear, addiction, love, or power. And honestly, the scary part is that most of them still don't realize how trapped they've become. This episode really feels like the moment where the foundations are being laid for everything to completely fall apart later in the season. So, there you have it. That was the full breakdown and explanation for Euphoria Season 3 Episode 5. What do you think is going to happen next? And honestly, which storyline do you think is heading toward the darkest ending this season?